thoughts and in my dreams. They're always in my mind. These songs of hobbits, dwarves and men, and elves, come close your eyes. You can see them too.
One of the most common questions I've gotten since I started doing this whole video series is, I don't know how to play, I don't know how to get started. It's really intimidating, I admitted it. Even getting started is very hard. Maybe not so hard once you get into it. It almost seems like a silly question, but you know, looking at the perspective from an outsider, I can definitely see there's so many books and so many games, and it seems so hard. You know, it almost seems abstract. Like, what am I supposed to do? Well, there's a lot of ways to get started. You kind of need to get introduced to it. The best way, really, is to know people who play it, and then ask them how I play it. And I admittedly, that's the hardest part, is finding people who share that interest. And even I'm struggling with that right now. I'd love to get a game together, but I don't know any friends who really play it. I know one or two, but you really need about, you know, at least 3 other people to play an RPG, preferably 4 to 6. That's a lot of people, and that's a lot of schedules to mesh together, especially when you're playing. It's a 5-hour game. You know, typically most sessions last 4 to 5 hours, sometimes more. And finding 4 to 6 people with schedules that can fit in a 5-hour slot of time, that's rough, especially today. Which is why I think online is such a big part of gaming now, and I think a lot of people should pursue online gaming over Skype. We use a program called OpenRPG, but let's just go with the basics on how to get started, and I'm sure Iron Liz has plenty of input on this, and so I'd suggest looking at Iron Liz's videos if you're curious. But let's just look at it from the perspective of, you don't know anything about D&D, but you're listening to these stories and you're like, that sounds like fun, I'd love to get together with friends, but I have no idea what I would do. And my friends would like to try it, but we have no idea. Let's just like go from the perspective of complete noobs, 4 to 6 noobs who no clue what to do. Well, the best idea, I think, would be to try, there's gateway games, you know, there's games that are kind of like D&D, but aren't quite the full experience, and that might seem like cheating or might seem like copping out, but it really is a good start. And there's a lot of games that used to do that. The game I started with is a board game, and there's a few of them that were around back in the 80s and 90s that you can't get anymore. Well, you could go to eBay or something like that. But there was a really classic game called Hero Quest, and I actually don't have that game anymore. We actually wore it out. We pretty much wore the pieces out. We used it so much. What Hero Quest is it's a 5-player game, 4 players and a guy who runs the story, called the storyteller or dungeon master. And what it is you put the board out and you have these little stand-up pieces and you make a map on the board. And you know, the guy running the story has a little book and he reads the story, and you have an objective. He tells the players an objective, and you know, the players have set rules. They move a certain speed and they hit certain weapons. You can equip your characters. It's very simple. It's a very quick board game, and there's no abstractness to it. It's very hack and slash. So when the players enter a room, the DM tells you what's in the room, and they fight the things, and they look around, and they get the items, and they go to the next room. And so, you know, it's very simple, very exploratory, impossible to mess up, really. And so if you've got kids, or you don't know anything about role-playing, and you just want to see if you can get the gist of it, see if you'd like it, and just kind of get in the groove of it, you know, kind of get in the whole fantasy groove, equipping characters, getting that kind of thing. Hero Quest was a great game to get started. It's a great way, and you know, once you start playing this board game, you can start thinking like, well, I could write stories. I could make a dungeon and have players go through it. I don't need this book, and that's where the role playing gets started. Or, you know, role playing really starts when you start moving out of the pure hack and slash, and adding a story to it and having the players make decisions and solve puzzles on their own. That you're not necessarily hand-holding them. Not that dungeon crawling is a bad thing, it's just that the dungeon crawling is where it starts. You know, is the real meat and potatoes, the fighting orcs and slaying monsters. That's where it really starts, and then you can start to tell stories. Other games that are really good for that, like Hero Quest. There was a parallel game made by TSR back in the day, and you've actually seen my video of it probably, called Dragon Strike. Had a really cheesy video to it, but ironically enough, it was really perfect to get you in the mood for what role-playing is like. You know, it's cheesy, of course, but you know, it's got the players sitting around, and there's a DM, he's telling the story, and you can kind of put yourself in that perspective of you playing these characters almost like it's in a movie. And that's really what D&D is kind of, the DM is making a movie that's imaginary, and you're playing in it. You're playing characters in like Lord of the Rings or something like that. So Hero Quest, Dragon Strike, there's a couple new games that are almost identical to Hero Quest in that regard. One, Wizards of the Coast released games called Castle Ravenloft, Shard of Shardalon, I think it's Shard of Shardalon or something like that. Wrath of Shardalon, that's what it is. Those are pretty simple games. Ironically enough, I don't like them as much as the game I'm about to show you. My brother picked this up. It's a board game called Descent: Journeys in the Dark. It's a lot like Hero Quest, but there's a lot more options to it. There's a lot of expansions to it. There's a lot more characters to choose from. Hero Quest only has 4 characters. There's a lot of characters to choose from here, and you can kind of get in this helps you think kind of tactically and, working as a team, because teamwork is really essential to these games. There's a lot of really cool pieces. The maps they actually fit together like puzzle pieces, so you're not using the same board all the time. It's pretty clever, and I actually think they started adding some campaign rules to it. It used to be like in Descent, your character started at like nothing and then they became heroic gods at the end of it. There actually is kind of rules to keep characters progressing through these stories, so you can have the same character going through them. Descent is really good. If you're looking for that D&D style board game, that's a good place to start. But if you want to jump right into role-playing, there's a few options. One Wizards of the Coast product I really like is the Red Box. There's a new Red Box out here, which really is a hand-holding guide. And I'm not saying this like people are stupid for needing a hand-holding guide. A lot of people do. I would have needed this back in the day. This is a really good introductory series of books to D&D. Basically what it is the book inside of it is essentially a choose-your-own-adventure book, which is actually another good way to get into D&D, is to find out choose-your-own adventures. It's that kind of decision-making that goes into it. And so it really holds your hand through just a very simple setup of an adventure. Like you're riding down the King's Road when all of a sudden you see smoke in the distance and you hear the sounds of steel clashing on steel. Well, what do? And it gives you like 5 options. Do you ride forward boldly down the road with sword drawn? Do you ride off into the undergrowth and sneak around? Do you cast a spell on yourself to make yourself invisible and peer from above? Or do you send your animal companion to go scout things out while you stay behind? Or do you draw your bow or something like that? Very simple options, and it kind of tells you as you make these decisions what kind of character you'd be ideal to play. It really is quite fantastic if you don't know anything about D&D, because it explains to you all these various concepts. It's like a tutorial. And if you're trying to get kids into it, or if you have a friend who doesn't know anything, which is very common to not know anything about D&D, this is a great series of books. And it even has a little book teaching you how to Dungeon Master. So what Dungeon Mastering is you explain the story. You're basically telling the players what they see. So the players go, we walk into the room, and the DM goes, okay, here's what's in the room. And then the players say, well, if there's a monster in the room, well, we'll fight it, or we'll talk to it, or if there's nothing in the room, well, we'll search for treasure and stuff like that. And so it really is, what the Dungeon Master does is, at a most basic level, is he acts as the director of the movie the players are in. And so they make decisions depending on their own characters, which might be good or evil, usually good. And then, from there, that tells a story. And so a DM, the trick for the DM is he has to adapt. Because the DM clearly has a way he wants the adventure to go, but you have the X factor of the players having free will, which is often where the best stories come from. So learning to deal with that is really just a matter of experience, but the Red Box is very, very good. If you think you have the gist of it and you don't need the hand-holding guide, ironically enough, most of the players' handbooks you'll find are pretty good at spelling things out at a basic level. So if you know the gist of role-playing, and you know generally what I'm talking about, but you don't know where to start with a game, well, it's very simple. Really what you're looking for, almost whatever game you want to play, Shadowrun, Call of Cthulhu, Dungeons and Dragons, Spycraft, 7th Sea, Earth Dawn, anything, what you're really looking for is the player's handbook. As long as you look for it or ask for it, I'm looking for the player's handbook to Dungeons & Dragons. Well, there you go. This is the player's handbook to Dungeons & Dragons. And you open this up, and really, especially Dungeons & Dragons, say what you will about the quality of the game, whether you like it or you don't like it, or you don't like the way things are going. Wizards of the Coast is really, really trying hard to attract new gamers and to make it as not intimidating as possible to get players in there. So they do a really good job of holding your hand step by step and teaching you the basics of D&D. So while this might look like a really intimidating book, it's not. It used to be very hard to get into, especially back in the 90s, 80s and 90s. It used to be a very college-y, college-age type thing where you kind of had to be initiated almost. It was kind of a secret language people had to speak, and it was kind of hardcore. You kind of had to be, tough to get into it, and it was kind of a snobbish thing, I think, back in the day. People wanted to play, of course, but it wasn't for kids. This is a lot more, I won't say kid-friendly, but it's a lot more newbie-friendly. So, and this basically, the game is almost too simple. If I had a complaint, it's almost too simple in the sense that if you want to play a character, it basically just hands you the sheet. So like if you say, well, I want to play a fighter, it goes, okay, here you go, here's your fighter. You have very few choices to make, and so that's where, if you're looking for harder games, you can go back in time, find other games. If you read D&D and you find you don't like it, well, there's a few other games. If there's no player's handbook, the other alternative you can find is look for a core rulebook. It's either player's handbook or core rulebook. This is one of the best games I've played in a long time. It's called Pathfinder. What it is Dungeons & Dragons went through several editions. This is the 4th edition of D&D. There's been a lot of editions previously, ironically not 3. There's been even though 3rd edition kind of went through 3 iterations as well. There's like version 3.5, which was the fix of 3rd edition. But basically what Pathfinder is it's kind of a fix to all the problems people had with 3rd edition. It's probably the best iteration of 3rd edition D&D, and probably one of the best games out there. I would really highly recommend Pathfinder if you're looking for that kind of mix between this is very easy, this is more challenging. So, but if you're into this kind of thing, it's very good. Now, another problem a lot of people have is, well, somebody has to run the game. That's a very difficult job. I mean, I've told you tons of horror stories about running the game. It's very scary. So people often ask, well, I don't know. I'd like to DM, but I don't know what kind of story I want to tell. I've just never done it before. And that's where you have pre-published modules. People have written modules that they're pre-generated. You basically read the book and you read the entries right out of the book. And I used to kind of turn my nose up at that, but they're really good places to start a campaign. Ironically, it's kind of funny where I used to turn my nose up at it, I almost always run a pre-published adventure as the player's very first adventure, because it's a good way for the players to meet, it's a nice way for them to get acquainted, and it's basically a nicely structured first level encounter for them to kind of get in the groove. And from there, you can kind of get a feeling for what the players want to do, how they want to act. And basically after the first adventure, I freestyle. I write the adventures, I kind of write my own plots, but the first adventure is usually scripted, and from there I know things will generally lead in a very logical direction. Something will get stolen, somebody will get killed, and they'll want to get revenge, they'll want to get their stuff back, or they'll just want to follow up on a lead that happened in the first adventure. I find it's very organic the way it happens, but what kind of adventure module would you choose? There's a lot of them. There's a lot of pre-published adventures out there, and it's very intimidating, and you don't know where to start. You don't know which one to get, and there's good ones, and there's very, very bad ones. And so that's another challenge, is you should ask around with people who play what kind of modules they liked or they didn't like, because people will warn you away, and even Pathfinder has some really dog adventures that are not very good. They have a lot of good ones now, like Carrion Crown. I really liked Carrion Crown. Kingmaker is a great Pathfinder adventure. But looking for those hooks, those first level hooks. Oh, Oreo, she tore the stuffing out of her toy. For first level, one book I found, you probably can't see it too well, it's called Dungeon Crawl Classics, The Adventure Begins. This is kind of an older book, but it's basically, it's 20, this has 20 adventures for first level characters. And they're very short, they're very simple. It's kind of just they go to one place and they solve a problem. But if you're looking for an excuse for players to meet or a problem for players to solve, this is a really great book. So it's Dungeon Crawl Classics 29, The Adventure Begins. I really like this book. It's just very simple. If you want to kick something off or a very short adventure to get people acquainted, or you're just kind of looking for a problem to solve, you could level these up. You could make the monsters harder, but this is a really great book. Dungeon Crawl Classics is generally a good kind of quick throw down and play type of game. I'm trying to look for other books. Really, I think from there, once you've found a group of people, which is really the trick, and you've kind of gauged interest, you just ask them what kind of game they want to play. Do they want to play D&D, which is very common? Do they want to play like a cyberpunk? Do they want to play like Marvel superheroes? You know, if they want to play cyberpunky or paranoia even, you know, just look for the player's handbook, have everyone read it. You're going to need dice. If you go to a game store, and that's the real trick, that's another real trick here, is just go to a game store. If you have a local hobby store that sells like magic cards or D&D, it's very easy. They really want to help you. They want to sell you stuff. So just ask for like a player's handbook. If they have a bulletin board, if you're looking for players, put a notice up. I generally don't like doing that, but just because I like playing with friends. I don't like playing with strangers, but I like playing with friends. But if you're looking for a group, it's a really good way. If you have friends online, ask around in the message board. I have a message board. If you're looking for players, go there. Ask if people want to play online. They have play by post. I'm sure people play on Skype. If you go to a bulletin board, leave an email address, people will come ask you. Just kind of, what you got to do is make a flyer and just describe the kind of game you want to play. And you can be as specific as you like. I don't want to play this kind of game. I want to play this kind of game. I'm looking for players available from here to here. And you'll get interest, and it works great. And actually, a lot of game stores have organized play. And even though I kind of turned my nose up again at organized play with the RPGA story, it's still a really good place to get started. They have what's called D&D Encounters now, which is basically like a 2-hour stretch of game. It's a very quick encounter that you just kind of get together with people, you play the encounter, and they will teach you. That's their job, is to teach you how to play. Because they want you around, they want to sell products. So that's the big thing, is they want you to be happy. They want you to learn how to play. So ask questions. Go to a game store, ask people, ask the person behind the counter. They really will be happy to help you. But yeah, what book do I get? Look for the player's handbook. That really is the number one thing. If you really are clueless, that's not a bad thing. Find the Red Box, find Descent, find Hero Quest. If you can find a copy of Hero Quest, dude, I played the shit out of that game. So it's a really good way to do it. Really, RPGs are accessible to anybody right now. It's kids on up. I've seen dads play with their kids with great success. Really young kids, I probably wouldn't recommend it, especially if you have some mature content. But it works fine. So I hope that was informative. I have a message board. If you want to go there, look at the bottom of the message board for seeking players. Just go there and ask questions, and I'm sure people will be happy to help you. But that's the thing, is role players nowadays are very friendly. They're really not at all that snobbish, except for the old guard like me, who can be very snobbish. But hell, I'm looking for players too. So I hope that helped you guys. Look for players' handbooks. Look for board games, and those are good places to start. And they're good ways to make friends. If you bring Descent to a game store and just kind of set it up, people will wander past and want to play. And that's how games get started. So watch some fantasy movies. You'll get some ideas. That's all I got. Have fun.